I see attendees are starting to join now, so thanks to everyone who was able to join us this afternoon. We'll just wait a few minutes while everyone is able to join. While people are joining, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items. So to start with, this will be recorded. So if you do miss something, you'll be able to, we'll make it available to you next week and you'll be able to review it. If you've used Zoom before for regular meetings, whether for work or with your family, you may notice a few different functions and tools for today's webinar. Everyone will be muted during this, during the webinar, except for our speakers, of course. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen. So if you hover your mouse at the bottom, you'll find the Q&A next to the raise hand button. When you hover your mouse at the bottom and you see that Q&A, you please feel free to enter questions throughout. I'll be monitoring those questions throughout the webinar, and then there'll be a point at the end that we'll have a formal Q&A time for that. You'll also see a chat function. So if this is where you can chat privately to someone else that's there, to the whole group. But if you, if you have any questions about the functionality, please feel free to put a notice in the chat there. If for any reasons you have technical difficulties with the video and you'd just like to listen in, you can do that. There was a dial-in number in the invitation that you received when you registered for the webinar. There's various numbers there that you can call in. So if you're having trouble with your video, please feel free to do that. So I just see a few more people joining, so I'll just give it another minute and then we'll get started. Welcome to those that just joined. We're just going to get started in a moment. So I have 4:04, so I think we'll get started now. So again, thanks to everyone who was able to join us this afternoon on this beautiful sunny day. If you were able to join the last session that we had for fund holders, we asked for some feedback at the end of the session to what other topics people would like to hear about. And certainly, gendered violence and women's crisis came up loud and clear as something that people were concerned about and wanted to learn more about. So in a moment, I'm going to be turning the podium, so to speak, over to Lori Payne. Lori is our Vice Chair of our Board of Directors at KWCF. Lori will be speaking on women's crisis and safety issues, and Lori will then turn the podium, again to speak, over to our three speakers from organizations in Waterloo Region, and I'm sure you'll recognize them. And finally, as I mentioned, there will be time for Q&A at the end. So I'd now like to introduce Lori Payne. Lori left corporate life in 2017 to focus her time and energy in skills in the community. With an accounting designation and specialties in program management, talent management, organizational development, and change management, she has had the opportunity to work in a variety of roles in strategy development, service excellence, human resources, and lean management. Alongside her work, Lori has been an active community volunteer, serving on several not-for-profit boards. As I mentioned, she's currently our Vice Chair of the Kitchener-Waterloo Community Foundation Board. She is also Chair of the Audit Committee and a founding member of our Social Finance Committee. Lori lives in St. Clements with her husband and teenage daughter. Lori, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And thanks everybody for joining us today to discuss this really important topic. As Elizabeth mentioned, we're focusing today's Do More Good dialogue on women's crisis and safety issues because it was an area of interest to participants who attended our session a few weeks ago. Of course, it's also very extremely timely as an emerging area of even more concern during COVID-19. I'm joined today by three amazing women from our community. We have Jennifer Hutton, CEO of the Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. We have Sara Casselman, Executive Director of the Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region. And we have Fauzia Mazhar, Executive Director of the Coalition of Muslim Women. Before I turn the discussion over to the panelists, I really wanted to reflect on some recent news about the situation we're currently facing, and that'll help provide some context and show why it's critical to discuss women's crisis and safety issues and why it's really important now. Canada's Minister of Women and Gender Equality, Maryam Monsef, was quoted a few weeks ago stating, with the self-isolation measures, with the closures of some of the support systems, the pandemic has created a power keg. So we're being encouraged to stay home in order to be safe. But what if our home isn't safe? Where do you go? What do we have? And do we have the supports in the community available to help those in need? Climbing rates of domestic violence have been reported around the world amid orders to stay indoors and limit social interaction to curb COVID-19. And closures of some shelters and reduced capacity at others is worsening the problem. And in fact, the United Nations is calling for an immediate global action to halt the surge. In parts of Canada, discussions have uncovered a 20 to 30% increase in rates of gender-based violence and domestic violence. And as we discuss this more today, I'm really going to be listening more for our experience in Waterloo Region. What percentage of women and girls experience violence before? And what's the apparent increase? And are those increases different by any population group locally? We've heard that the federal government has pledged $50 million to assist women's shelters, sexual assault centers, and similar facilities in Indigenous communities through the crisis. And it'll be interesting to discuss if any of that money will flow to Waterloo Region and what it can best be used for. I know we're going to talk today a lot about access to services, the waiting lists, and the potential for demand that can't be met. There appears to be an expectation and a real likelihood of a surge in demand for services once the isolation measures start to be reduced. And I believe that's also worthy of consideration and conversation. If we believe that Waterloo Region will require further resources down the road, what does that look like? And will our community be ready? So let's get the conversation started. We've asked each of these panelists to share information with us for about 10 minutes. Where they're going to talk about information about their organization, who their organization supports, and specifically how they help women in crisis, the key issues they're facing, and particularly now with COVID-19. And so Jen, I'm getting ready. I'm going to turn it over to you, but I want to introduce you first. And just note, if there's any topics that I just spoke about that fit naturally with what you're going to talk about, feel free to cover them. Otherwise, we'll cover them later in the Q&A potentially. Jennifer Hutton is the CEO of Women's Crisis Services of Waterloo Region. She has served in this role for 2 years. However, she's been with the organization for over 7 years in total. Jennifer has a master's degree in social work, as well as a master's in business administration, both from Wilfrid Laurier University. Prior to working in the violence against women sector, Jennifer worked in children's mental health. What fuels Jennifer is the strength and resiliency she sees in women and children as they overcome significant barriers to lead happier, healthier lives. Over to you, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in today, because it really shows your interest in this issue. And right now, we're really living within, we have a pandemic happening, but we have another pandemic happening within that pandemic, which is gendered violence. So at Women's Crisis Services, we support women and children in the community who are experiencing domestic violence. And we do this in a number of different ways. We offer safe shelter, education, outreach services, and we also have a 24/7 support line. At any one time, about half of our residents are children, specifically children under the age of 8. The last couple months have been especially challenging and busy as our emergency shelters have remained open and have been deemed an essential service. So we run 2 shelters. We have Anselma House in Kitchener and Haven House in Cambridge. Each of those shelters has 45 beds. So we have a total of 90 beds for our region. We're actually one of the biggest emergency shelters in the province. We actually do require all those beds, and that's partly because our regional police get 6,100 domestic violence service calls in 1 year. To manage during COVID-19, we've had to put in a lot of precautionary measures into place. When you come in our doors, and that you're only coming in our doors essentially if you're working here, because we're limited in terms of visitors. There's screening at the front door. We're screening our residents twice a day, taking temperatures, doing all sorts of things really to keep our residents and our staff safe. Our staff are wearing masks, and we're doing increased cleaning and sanitization, and of course, ensuring physical distancing. All this has been tough on residents and tough on staff, but we're getting through it. And we've been relatively fortunate that we have new shelters, and with those new shelters, we have individual bedrooms and bathrooms. So that's been just a real luxury during this time, because if we needed somebody to isolate, then we have the capacity to do that. Even though we have all this room at our shelter, and we're typically at 90 to 100% capacity, during the pandemic, we've seen our capacity go anywhere from 40 to 60%. So a real significant decrease. In any 1 year, we get about 3,000 calls to our support line. We've also seen that number decrease during the pandemic. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about why that might be the case. So Lori talked a little bit about this. We know that home may not be safe for everyone, and that violence can actually escalate during natural disasters and of course times of increased stress. As we're urged to socially distance to make sure that we're controlling the spread of COVID-19, we really think about all those women that might be living with an abusive partner. Women who already face a series of difficult decisions and a wide range of barriers to leaving a domestic violence situation in the first place. And then you layer in constrictions around mobility and social distancing and the increased economic vulnerability. That it really isn't a surprise that we've seen a reduction in the requests for our services, whether that's our shelter or a 24/7 support line. So it's just that much more difficult for women to reach out right now. And we know typically they would maybe wait for their partner to go to work for the day, and that's when they would make the call to reach out for support. So that becomes that much more difficult. And we know that their partner may use the situation against them to further isolate and control what they're doing. According to reports around the world, we know that domestic violence rates are increasing, and nationally we've seen rates increase about 20 to 30%. And you may have heard this statistic, which is a bit of a dire one, that 9 women have been killed in domestic homicides within Canada in the last 34 days. So I'm just going to let that number sink in a minute. So that's 9 women in Canada, our country, within the last 34 days. I actually had my sister send me an article about that and say, is this for real? And I said, unfortunately, it is. And we know that that's an increase over the number of femicides we would typically see within a year in Canada. Because we're so worried about how hard it is for women to reach out, we've really been doing a couple things. We've been encouraging friends and family and neighbors to connect and keep their eyes open and watch out and provide support as needed. We also very quickly, in a matter of a couple days, as they say, sometimes during crisis, it can be speed over precision. We set up a chat feature on our website to provide an alternative to women having to pick up the phone, which very likely could be unsafe. And to provide a bit of hope after some dire stats, we recently had a woman come into shelter with her young children, and she actually connected with us to be able to make a safety plan to safely come and seek shelter. And she spoke with a residential worker, and once she got to us and was doing some of the intake that we normally do when women and children come into shelter, she said to us that if it wasn't for the chat feature and having that alternative as a different way to reach out, then she might not have gotten to safety. So it's really heartwarming to know that there is these stories during this difficult and uncertain time. Our outreach team sees over 1,000 women each year in the community. They're meeting with women to assess risk level, develop safety plans, help them navigate the legal system, and find safe and affordable housing. We're not currently running that program face-to-face like we normally would, so we've had to switch and offer that service virtually. And not only are we offering those same services through Zoom and other methods, but we're also supporting families through assisting with grocery drop-offs and doing porch delivery of care packages. So that's been very valued by our clients. As I kind of mentioned, we've really been focusing our efforts on educating the community as to what to do if you're worried about a loved one. How do you stay connected? How do you provide that additional support? So we've been doing a lot of that, and the outreach team has really been helpful in that regard. We're also working at offering some additional programs more virtually, and that's our Safe Steps program and our youth education program. So we're in the midst of getting that up and running, and our youth education program should actually be virtual within the next month. So that's pretty exciting. Within the shelter, we've been running a bunch of different programs, and we do that in partnership with some external service providers. And they've been doing those services virtually, but the good news is with some of the lessening of some of the restrictions that was previously in place, we're soon able to start to get them back into shelter. And a few of those programs are Dr. Kathy. She's our psychologist and mental health expert. We have a music therapist, also named Kathy, and we also have recently started a trauma yoga program, which is kind of cool and something new that we're trying. And we even have a service dog as part of that trauma yoga. So we're quite interested in getting that going live. To tell you a little bit more about the value of some of these programs, I just want to share a bit of a story about our music therapy program, because really it's one of our most beloved programs by our residents. Not too long ago, we had a mom and her children come into shelter, and she had a young son. His name was Harry. We've changed his name to protect confidentiality. And Harry was actually one of 10 children. So they took up a number of bedrooms, but Harry in particular was really struggling. And he was struggling with some language difficulties. More specifically, he was struggling with stuttering. So this was causing Harry a lot of grief because he was getting bullied at school, and it was just quite frustrating for him. So he started to attend music therapy. And it was quite interesting that he found that during this music therapy session, that he started to do a drumming exercise. And as he did this drumming exercise in combination with adding in some chanting and some short phrases, that he was actually able to manage his stuttering. So the music therapist, when she was telling us this story, she said the look on Harry's face when he figured out how effective this technique was just absolutely priceless. So then she proceeded to use this to really help Harry by just having him more subtly tap on his leg in a rhythmic way so that he could really kind of control his language, and it worked. And so the music therapist then brought his mom into the session, and she was pretty much in tears when she was hearing how effective this program was and seeing that Harry now had a way to really manage his stuttering. And stuttering, we know, is something that can be connected to exposure to trauma in early childhood. So it's stuff like this that our music therapy program does. So, you know, as much as we're offering safe shelter and warm bed and food, it's these programs that actually are life-changing. So I will end there. And I just want to thank you again for joining us and for your interest in this topic.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. That was excellent. And you know, it's lovely to end with a story like that, because so many of the statistics you shared were so shocking. And, you know, the 9 women being killed in Canada in the last 34 days. And, you know, I did not have an idea that 6,100 domestic violence service calls happened each year in Waterloo Region through our police service. So thank you for enlightening us and for demonstrating such partnership and innovation and you know, adaptation through these COVID times. So I'm now going to turn it over to Sara in a second. I'm going to introduce her. Sara is the Executive Director of the Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region, and I love her Twitter profile. She's a community builder, a rabble rouser, a feminist, an advocate, a maker, a wanderer, and a lover of kindness. And Sara has worked to address gender-based violence locally since 2002. Driven by the belief that social change is possible, she's passionate about addressing systems that perpetuate inequality and violence. Sara is a graduate of Laurier of Conestoga College and of Leadership Waterloo Region, and she co-chairs the Sexual Assault Response Team of Waterloo Region. She sits at a number of community tables, and she represents her center provincially as a member of the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers. So over to you, Sara.
Thanks very much. Today we're sharing a little bit about what our agencies do and then the impact that the pandemic has had on our agencies. So I actually thought that the easiest way to kind of summarize what we do at the Sexual Assault Support Center was to share a video that we created in November. So we were lucky enough to be one of the 7 agencies this past year that was involved with Perfect Pitch through social venture partners. And so a team of us worked on creating a pitch, and I had the honor of delivering it, a little bit nerve-wracking. And so it's just a few minutes, but it kind of summarizes the situation that we were in before the pandemic. And then after we watch that, I'll talk a little bit about what's happened since that time. So I'll just send it over to the video.
Well, I have the honor of introducing our very first speaker this evening. It's Sara Casselman from the Sexual Assault Support Center. Sara.
When Diane was 16, she'd endured all she could. The assaults were becoming more aggressive, and something needed to shift. One morning, she stayed home from school and mustered up courage for a conversation with her mom. Diane's words hung in the air. "Your husband is raping me." The next day, while her stepfather sat in his recliner, her mom packed up her belongings and told Diane to leave. It would take years and a suicide attempt for Diane to reach out to us at the Sexual Assault Support Center. We're there when someone's experienced the darkest time in their life. In the post-Me Too era, our center's been flooded with calls for support. Jian Ghomeshi, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, sexual assaults in the military, in the RCMP, on college campuses, concerns over police responses to sexual assaults, headline after headline. And with each, more survivors spoke out. We're on the front lines of this cultural shift locally. 5 years ago, 40 survivors on a wait list would have been a crisis. Now we have 140. It's our new normal. As a sexual assault support center, we wrap survivors in community care. Our support's free and it doesn't come with time limits. And for 30 years, our motto's been, "You're not alone." In the post-Me Too era, we need your help to say this with confidence to survivors. Diane reached out at a time without wait lists. She called her 24-hour support line. She got counseling. She attended groups. Our volunteers went to the police station with her to report, and when the time came, a member of our staff team was by her side in court. The seeds our center planted took root. Diane went back to school, graduating in 2017. She's now a social service worker, a mother, a partner, and a volunteer in our public education program. So my ask to you, First, do you know a survivor who's struggling? Please put them in touch with us. We exist to help. Second, take your ballot and mark a checkbox beside the Sexual Assault Support Center. Your vote tonight and a monthly gift of $100 will ensure support is there for one survivor when they reach out. We asked Diane what it would have been like to be added to a year-long wait list. She said it would have confirmed that she wasn't important, that yet again she wasn't believed, that she wasn't worth it. Diane, will you stand? If you believe that Diane and the survivors waiting are worth it, I invite you to stand right now in solidarity. Thank you.
So we thought that that would be a good way to kind of summarize what our center does and the situation that we were in before the pandemic hit. So as I said in the video, we're in a new era. The post-Me Too era, survivors have been just reaching out in record numbers. When Jen was talking about the situation around domestic violence and our police, she shared numbers locally. And so for sexual assaults, we generally have about 900 sexual assaults reported to our police annually, but sexual assault is the least reported violent crime. So we know that only about 5% of sexual assaults end up being reported to police. So when we see 900 reports, we can easily understand that the number is much, much higher than that. And so research tells us that during wars, natural disasters, pandemics, violence against women increases in our communities. So although the measures that we put in place to reduce the spread of COVID-19 are really important, we also know that when there is isolation, social distancing, change in routines, additional stressors, violence against women increases. So when there's, we know that this is the case, it's the reality. And so domestic violence increases, but intimate partner sexual assault increases, childhood sexual abuse increases. So we're looking at what's going to happen right now, but also what's going to be the long-term impact of the pandemic in terms of the demand for our services. We also know that a lot of the things that are put in place right now to limit the spread of COVID in our communities are also the same tools that abusers use to control their victims. And isolation is a really big part of what survivors of gender-based violence are experiencing right now. We also know that locally the police have said that there's an increase of 10 to 20% in domestic violence calls locally. And sexual violence calls are actually down because there's much less like public gatherings or parties or alcohol facilitated sexual assaults, but that's only what we're seeing in terms of public, because things are happening behind closed doors right now. In terms of the calls to our center, the calls that come in on our 24-hour support line have remained consistent. We're still getting calls for intake. Last I heard, we had 145 survivors on our waiting list. That said, the increase on our center is, the increase in demand is very high, particularly because the survivors that we have been supporting and the survivors on our waiting list are now desperate for support. So for instance, there could have been a survivor that we were seeing every couple of weeks for counseling who are now requesting weekly sessions. And so there has been an increase in demand for our services during the pandemic from those that we're seeing, those on our waiting list, and that's just what's happening right now. So we have put a lot of measures in place to ensure that support happens, even though our physical office isn't open. All our staff are still working, all our programs are still running, and we're busier than ever. So our counselors are all providing online Zoom sessions, counseling sessions via phone. Sometimes our clients are actually going for walks and talking to their counselor as their session, because even if they're in a safe, supportive home, a lot of the things they share with a sexual violence counselor is not what they want someone else to hear. So often our counselors are basically going on a virtual walk with survivors as they're having their counseling session. So we really have shifted in terms of how we operate remotely to ensure that everyone is safe. So that's happening. One of the things I'm really proud of is we are the first community-based sexual assault center in Ontario to start our group and workshop program online. So we like others, kind of moved to virtual services mid-March, and by the end of March we were offering online groups and workshops. So I actually want to do a shout out to the KW Community Foundation for this, because we are midway through a year of funding for our group and workshop program. So before COVID hit, we were having 3 to 4 workshops and groups in our center every week. It was a really robust program. People were accessing it. So we really grew our program because of the funding that we received from KWCF. And then when COVID hit, we're like, we're just going to figure out how to do this remotely. And we really quickly shifted. And our website, our new website is up, and survivors can go there and see a whole list of groups and workshops. There's no waiting list for groups and workshops. They can sign up. And a lot of them are topics that are specific to what survivors are dealing with right now. So how do you deal with isolation? How do you deal with the anxiety? When someone has experienced trauma, they experience what we're all experiencing, but at a heightened level right now. And the incredible thing is that we always had a strong, like this past year, really strong group and workshop program, but the online groups and workshops are even higher attendance than anything that we were seeing when we were offering physical ones. I think that is because, 1, it's very accessible to survivors right now, and 2, survivors are in crisis. 3, the need for peer support and support in that way where you can see other people and interact with them is so important. So we're actually seeing higher registrations right now than we ever did when we were doing even in person. So we're really proud of that, and we're really grateful for the funding for that program, because I don't know what the situation would be if we didn't have a group and workshop coordinator handling all of that right now. We also launched a new website just a few weeks ago, and one of the features that we now have is online chat support in the corner of our new website. So, and I know that Women's Crisis Services also just put this feature on their website. So again, trying to create new ways for people to connect with us, because even if they are in a safe home, which not everyone we're supporting is, there are lots of women that are experiencing domestic violence or other issues where they are not, but if they are, still the subject matter is so sensitive that they don't want others to hear. So having new ways to reach out to our staff team and our volunteers is really, really important. The other thing that we did is, the very first thing that we did was we increased the capacity of our 24-hour support line. So our 24-hour support line has existed in our community for more than 30 years. And it's always been there as a resource, but we wanted to make sure that if our numbers increased, that there was always someone there. So we did that. And then the other thing is that we have one of the strongest public education programs of any shelter or sexual assault center in Ontario. We are an agency that, while we do that frontline work and we support survivors and so passionate about it, we're also really passionate about social change and wanting to make a difference. And so we have a whole team of public educators that go out into the community, that talk about everything from gendered violence to how to respond when somebody discloses sexual violence, to how to be an ally, to how to what healthy masculinity and healthy relationships look like. So again, we had to make shifts and changes to move to an online format. And that's what's happening. So there are businesses that are being trained on sexual harassment and gender equity right now, all online. We're regularly having workshops for the public that folks can register for on how to respond when somebody discloses sexual violence. So if this is something that you're interested in, not just sexual violence, but any form of gendered violence, you can go to our website and find out when our next workshop is and sign up for it. We've had responding to disclosure workshops every couple of weeks, and they've been full since the pandemic started. And I think that right now, with violence against women increasing, people at home, there's more need than ever for folks to be able to recognize the signs of when someone's being abused, and then also what to do and how to respond. So our team are offering that, and our public education is free for folks, so please check that out if you're interested. And so I think right now, I shared recently with someone else, and I just wanted to say some of the things that are making me hopeful are the fact that there has been such a shift right now in recent years about sexual violence. We're talking about it like never before, and that's why we've been inundated. That's why so many survivors are coming out. So survivors are coming out, reaching out for support. The community is more invested in this topic. Actually, last year, KWCF invited me to be the speaker for the annual town hall meeting. And particularly because a report had just come out that listed Waterloo Region as the least safe urban center in Canada for women. It meant that the combined rates of sexual assault, domestic violence, criminal harassment, which is stalking, were the highest in Canada. And I was invited to kind of speak to that in our community. So we have this issue in our community, but we also have so much expertise in the community in terms of how to address it and how to move this issue forward so that we're not in that position. I'd rather us be known as the most safe city for everyone, for women in our community, for women. So we're working on making a change. And so our public education is making me hopeful. The fact that there's been a shift in attitudes about sexual assault is making me hopeful. The fact that there are more people than ever invested is making me hopeful. And then also the fact that survivors are getting the support that they need. Our center has grown. We are offering more support than ever before, but the demand has just been so much higher than what we've been able to serve. But we do feel embraced by our community, and that's how we want survivors to feel too, that they're wrapped in community care.
Thank you so much, Sara. I always learn something when I hear you speak, and that video hits me every time. I've watched it a few times, and it's very impactful. And I think, again, an example, similar to what Jennifer talked about, that learning, that adaptation, that new ways to adapt and connect have been so key in this time. And that 145 on the waiting list, and the message that came through in the video, which is, what it says to people is not only it's a wait, but you're not worth it. And that's a terrible thing to hear is happening for folks. So thank you so much. And now I'm going to turn to introduce our final speaker for the afternoon, and that's Fauzia Mazhar. And I'm going to do her introduction, which is, I actually had an opportunity to participate in Leadership Waterloo Region with Fauzia. We won't say how many years ago, but Fauzia has 18 plus years of experience in the local social profit sector, much of it in leadership and management. She holds a Master's of Social Work degree with specialization in community, policy, planning, organizations, and a postgraduate certificate in leadership and management from Wilfrid Laurier University. Fauzia also completed, as mentioned, Leadership Waterloo Region, and she's previously worked at great organizations, House of Friendship, the Working Center, Kitchener Downtown Community Health Center, and the Family Center, which is part of Family and Children's Services of Waterloo Region. Her work experience includes managing a neighborhood-based community center and a large service hub, as well as leading community collaborations and social change initiatives. She has served as the president of Pakistan Canada Association, council member and chair of the Belong Group for Immigration Partnership Waterloo Region, and is a member of the board of directors of the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery. Over to you, Fauzia.
So thank you for this opportunity. I will start by saying that, giving you a little bit of history about Coalition of Muslim Women. It started in 2010 as a grassroots group of local Muslim women who were very passionate about improving the socio-economic integration of Muslim women in Kitchener-Waterloo by primarily working in two domains: dismantling stereotypes and misconceptions about Muslim women and providing opportunities for personal and professional growth for them. Today, our organization is a federally registered not-for-profit organization with about 60 members and 200 plus volunteers. We provide training and opportunities for skills development and personal and professional growth for Muslim women while addressing issues of racism, discrimination, and Islamophobia through education, advocacy, outreach, and bridge building. Our activities also include system-level advocacy to address the issues that I just mentioned, initiating and supporting research through university community collaborations, organizing large-scale events and public education campaigns to promote cross-cultural and interfaith understanding, providing diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings with a focus on Islamophobia to service providers and institutions, and offering art-focused programs and activities, including annual art exhibitions since 2015, showcasing Muslim women and girls artists. CMW is the only organization in our region, as well as in neighboring municipalities, with focused efforts to challenge and address Islamophobia, which disproportionately affect women who identify as Muslim and are identifiable as such in public through their clothing choices. CMW's membership, volunteer, and employment opportunities are open to all women, irrespective of their faith or non-faith affiliations. Our programs and services are geared to serving Muslim women, though, primarily in KW. However, we have been providing some programming in Cambridge for almost 2 years now, mostly in partnership with Muslim Women of Cambridge, which is a Cambridge-based initiative inspired by CMW. So the key issues that our organization has been working for quite some time are hate incidents and hate crimes against Muslim women, Islamophobic violence, which also again disproportionately affect Muslim women, discrimination, harassment, and racism, particularly in the domains of employment, housing, access to services, unemployment, underemployment of Muslim women in general, and also women and youth empowerment. So just to give you an idea about our people who we work with, and we also have, many of us also come with first-hand experience of, we share the experiences with people who we work with. We're working with a subset of the population which is marginalized and disadvantaged at many, many levels. Their gender, their newcomer status, their racial and cultural identities, as well as characteristics, and their association with the faith, which is unfortunately maligned and despised very, very openly and regularly, increase their vulnerability and risk of violence against them many, many, many fold. They can very well be facing spousal abuse and or other forms of family violence against women at home, and racism, discrimination, hate incident, hate crime based on their racial, cultural, and religious identity outside of their homes, right in their neighborhoods. They do not have their traditional support system here in Canada and are generally not accustomed to non-traditional support systems, including therapy and counseling. Many do not have the knowledge and the access to technology that we take for granted. Many have significant language barriers when it comes to communicating in English. So our success in connecting with these women was very much due to the supportive connections and networking opportunities that many of our activities provided to the women who attended programs and events. COVID-19, of course, has further isolated this subsection of the population, and it has increased their risk, and they have become more vulnerable to violence at home, as well as outside in their very neighborhoods and online. We know that stress and anxiety in this society is a double-edged sword for minorities. On one hand, they're affected by the conditions creating stress and anxiety, so the current example of COVID-19. And on the other hand, they become scapegoats for the fears of the majority populations. In our case, we have seen anti-Asian hate, especially really turning into physical violence and verbal assaults in Europe, North America, including Canada. Similarly, Muslim community has been targeted by far-right groups in many ways. They are pushing conspiracy theories against Muslims during this pandemic. They blame Muslim populations for spreading corona by not following the rules, or even worse, intentionally transmitting corona to non-Muslims in North America and Europe. The later part is being dubbed as corona jihad, believe it or not. Messages are out there about churches being closed, but mosques are open. These activities are primarily online, but are proving to be more and more effective, as Sara was talking about, because at this time of social isolation, everyone seems to spend more and more time online. Hate crimes are seldom reported to authorities by victims, and there are so many factors behind that, including pressure from the immediate family to not go through the hassle of reporting it. Before COVID, we heard about hate-based incidents regularly when women attended programs and events. Now that option is gone. Locally, we have seen a home vandalized in Laurelwood neighborhood. The family was very reluctant about talking to media or authorities about it. Recently, we have come to know about a Confederate flag flying incident in Waterloo. In one instance, where our staff is working with a racialized family of two women, basically a mother and a daughter, who've been a target of xenophobic and racial slurs, comments, and other forms of harassment by their next door neighbor for a year or so. But what happens that things have become more difficult and intense during this social isolation phase. Firstly, the incidents have become more frequent and more intense. And secondly, victims feel more traumatized due to the COVID-related isolation conditions and resulting challenges for their mental health. They're already feeling depressed and isolated, and on top of that, they are regularly targeted by their neighbor. Other challenges to assisting this family during this time include access to the family home, to install security cameras. We're able to install security cameras for them, thanks to a grant from the Christian and Waterloo Community Foundation. But they have, both family members have underlying health conditions, which is really limiting access for people from outside. Also arranging meetings with police services. In-person meetings are deemed high risk for the family due to the age and health related conditions, and Zoom is not trusted by the police services due to security concerns. They requested support with trauma counseling, but the counseling is available primarily online or via phone, and there's a long wait list at the major counseling agencies. One other concern that we have is the need for counselors to have at least some knowledge and understanding of hate-based crimes and incidents and their impact on victims. We also share the concern about underreporting of violence inside homes in these times. We're hearing from neighbors or friends that they're worried about someone's safety. They don't really seem to have any fact, but they are probably recognizing some signs. They're reaching out. We provide them with information, about programs, about agencies that can provide support and stuff like that. That's all we can offer at this point. We're concerned about the surge in violence against women, including hate incidents post-pandemic. In a time where our economy will be really down, because that's where we see that there will be more polarization, or foresee that there will be more polarization and more scapegoating of minorities in terms of the fears in the larger society. Our office has been closed since March 16. Staff is working remotely. It's not the ideal environment. We think for confidentiality of the service, they're using their own laptop to access their work emails. Our work emails are secure. However, their laptop is their laptop. We do not have the capacity to help the staff build their home office or help them, do things more like really remotely instead of using their own home space and home equipment. We're connecting with our population primarily through Facebook, WhatsApp, and phone. WhatsApp seems to be very popular, and it's for many reasons. I think one of the things is it's least it's not suspectable because people use WhatsApp all the time to communicate with their families around the world. So there is a lot that's happening on WhatsApp. We offered a number of information sessions on Zoom and end of April, early May. That was our way to introduce ourselves and also the population that we work with to some online programs and activities. These sessions provided information on COVID-19 related matters, and they were attended well. The attendance kind of varied between 30 per session to 4 in a session, but it gave us an opportunity and also gave an opportunity to women to really get accustomed to Zoom and other online platforms. We're currently planning for next phase of Zoom sessions. We're working on alternative ways of outreach as well. For example, we're thinking of creating regular phone check-in system by our volunteers who will be trained to provide information and referrals as needed. So currently we are in the process of planning for Zoom sessions in the future, and also are hopeful that there will be partial opening up of the services very soon. Thank you.
That's great, Fauzia. Thank you so much. Again, hard to hear, the fact of these incidents happening in our community. Very eye-opening about that, the impact, the existence of them, especially that your thought about and sharing about the scapegoat for the stress of others, and that's not something I had thought about before. So thank you very much for sharing that, even though it's hard to hear. So I'm going to turn it with that over to Elizabeth to see if we have time to do a few questions.
You can, thanks very much, Lori, and all the panelists, or as I like to refer to them as the 3 rock star women, 4 with Lori and the 3 speakers. So thank you so much. As you can see, the sun is now coming in a different place. So we have, and I do have some questions coming in through the Q&A box. So thank you. Please, if anyone does have any more, if you want to pose them in that Q&A box. But I'm going to just pause for a few seconds because we have a number of people dialed in on the phone. So I'm just going to pause, and please jump in. If you're on the phone and you have a question you want to ask, please do it now. All right, then I am going to turn to a couple of the questions that have been sent in. So perhaps, I know one that I've heard quite a bit is, are you currently accepting donations off of your sort of wish list, Jennifer? And if so, how do we drop them off?
Hi, we're actually not accepting donations right now. That will probably change, and that's physical donations. We're looking ahead to that, but as of the measures that we've put in place, and we have not had items dropped off.
Okay.
So yeah.
Great. Okay, thanks, Jennifer. All of you discussed the service levels, and there was a question about people waiting for services. So because this is so important, can each of you just indicate again if you have a waiting list and the implications to people who need your support? So maybe we'll start with Fauzia.
Hi. We do not have a waiting list for our services because our programs were mostly, workshops and trainings and stuff like that. We had a lot of face-to-face contact, and through those informal contact, we were able to provide a lot of support. However, as I shared the example of this woman who's in need of counseling, the family, and there is 4 months wait for trauma-informed counseling at major counseling centers.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Fauzia. How about you, Sara? You mentioned 145 women, I believe, on your people on your wait list.
Yeah, we have 145 survivors on our wait list. The vast majority, 90+%, are women who have experienced sexual violence. So, I mean, that's pretty consistent right now with what we've had for the last couple of years, which is why we've been so much out in the community talking about the need. Truthfully, I've been asked a few times like what we would need to get rid of our waiting list, and we'd essentially need 2 more full-time counselors at our center to do that with the demand that we have now, let alone the expected increase related to COVID. That said, we do have, and I think it's important to know, when we say that, we don't want survivors to not access this because of the waiting list. Because we have a triaging system, and I even hate using that word, but what we do if someone's in like really serious crisis. Now, everyone who calls us is in crisis. It's very hard to take those calls with our waiting list. But sometimes, given the circumstances, we can actually kind of expedite someone. So if someone's been just recently assaulted, or it's a teenager, or they're actively, say, being called to court to testify against the person who's assaulted them, we always prioritize them and make sure we get the help. The other thing is that we have a variety of other services that they can access, like the group and workshop program. And that's why it's so important to us that we have that, because it's a tool that even folks who are on that waiting list for individual counseling can access our supports while they're doing that.
Great, thanks, Sara. And Jennifer?
Yeah, right now we have capacity at our shelters. If you were to look at, say, November last year, we would have had full shelters, and that may mean that sometimes a woman may have to wait for that shelter bed to become open. We offer them, we connect with other kind of neighboring women's shelters like Guelph, Stratford, and if they're willing to go out of the region temporarily until a bed is open, then that offer is made, and we help facilitate that, provide transportation, that kind of thing. Otherwise, they're serviced through outreach until they get a bed, and our outreach team does not maintain a wait list. So you can get in pretty easily that way.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Fauzia, you mentioned, I think, 200 volunteers. One of the questions that came in was, how are your organizations handling changes in volunteer patterns as a result of COVID-19? So could you just answer that with regards to the large number of volunteers you have? How are you handling that?
We're finding it difficult to continue to engage the volunteers. Our volunteers need to do work to be engaged. So the Zoom sessions that I was talking about earlier were all offered by but maybe a couple were offered by our volunteers. So we trained them a little bit, and they offered these sessions, which was attended by others in the community. And then the other program that I mentioned that we're planning at this point is training a number of volunteers on doing regular check-ins with people in their networks, kind of like, creating these check-in systems. And these volunteers would have knowledge about other community resources and connections that they will be able to connect if, wherever there is a need. We try to have every year, we have a big Taste of Ramadan event, which has engages about 120 volunteers. This year we tried to do it virtual, online. However, there wasn't a lot of interest from our volunteers in doing that physical event online. So we postponed that idea. I must say that, yes, being able to offer things online is really great. But it's not the same as the face-to-face connection or, the in-person connection is. At least in our experience, we're finding that it is a little bit more difficult to connect with our population through online.
Great, thanks, Fauzia. I am cognizant that it's 5 o'clock. We did start about 3 or 4 minutes late, so I'm just going to ask 2 last questions if people are able to hang on just a little bit longer. But one of the questions that's come up is for all of the speakers, what can we do to provide a safe space for our friends and family to confide in us? Are there certain questions we can ask them or certain things we can listen for in what they're saying? So Jen, maybe we'll take that over to you first.
Yep. Well, I think the first thing is you really want your friend or family member to know that you're a safe person to talk with, so that you're going to be a listening ear. You're not going to judge. Can be a lot of shame associated with these issues. So you just want to really create that openness. And sometimes I've said things like, it's very much a woman's journey, and it can be a long journey sometimes. For women, we know on average, I think they leave these abusive relationships about 14 times now before they leave for good. So there needs to be a lot of patience. You need to kind of plant that seed that you're there when they need you and when they're ready. But also, that being said, is don't be afraid to ask them right out and to express their worry and to express, what you've noticed. So that would be some points of advice from me.
Great, thank you. Sara?
I mean, I'd echo what Jen said. I'd add, you know, Jen was talking about make sure that you're a safe space, no judgment. And so for survivors of sexual violence, again, such a layered, like complicated, survivors are so often blamed for their own experience of sexual victimization. So really important to check yourself in terms of your reaction. There's nothing that anyone can do to ever cause someone to sexually assault them. That's the choice of the person who's assaulting them. And so when somebody discloses, make sure you don't ask those why questions, like, why did you invite him into your house during COVID? Or why did you, like those kinds of things. Why questions imply judgment. And I often say to folks, with 1 in 3 women in Canada being a survivor of sexual assault, if you've never had anyone disclose to you, you need to really think about whether you are creating a safe space, because that's a lot of women in our communities and in our lives that have had that experience. So just make sure, even like social media and those kinds of things, that the things you're putting out, create a safe space where they know there wouldn't be judgment, you'd be a safe person to talk to, and also just be really aware of the choices should be, if you're talking about an adult, the choices should be made by the survivor, that you're there to listen and to offer information and options in our community. If it's a child, just to be clear, any child under 16, you actually have a immediate responsibility to report that to Family and Children's Services.
Great, thank you. And Fauzia, anything you'd like to add to that question?
In addition to what Jennifer and Sara have already said, I would say reach out to people who you know and also people who you don't know. I know with all the physical distancing rules, so people who you know, make a plan to call or, send a text message or something, reach out to people. Social isolation is quite hard. And in our culture now, we kind of tend to keep to ourselves a lot, and creating that space where you can call in someone, you can send a text, you can send a message on Messenger, just, how you're doing, it would be really, really helpful. And same thing, if you're out for a walk and you see a newcomer family, woman or someone, just a smile, just waving hi, something that can send a signal that you're a friendly person and you can be trusted, will go a long way. Also, be informed, educate yourself. It's very important.
Great advice. Thank you, all three of you. I'm going to close with one last question. So I would like to ask a question that leaves us thinking about possibilities. So if each of you could just take a moment and share with us what is happening that's working at your organization, or alternatively, what gives you hope right now? So Jennifer, can we start with you?
Yeah, for sure. Well, definitely one thing that gives me a lot of hope is really the growing awareness and discussion, that's happening within gendered violence. I have not seen as much media coverage and articles coming out and people talking about it, and people expressing concern about women that might be in homes with abusive family members. So, I'm just really feeling hopeful just around that growing awareness. And one other piece of hope is, I always get lots of hope from stories from some of the women and children that we help. And some of that came recently in the last week or so. First off, we have a gratitude board in the shelter. And one woman wrote on our gratitude board a little sticky note that said, "Thank you for helping me change my life." And then similar to that, I had an email from one woman who came into shelter, and it was about 2 pages long with each staff and how they helped her. And she actually referred to the pandemic and talked about, yes, like I get how hard this is to run a shelter and to keep us safe. And, you've got residents upset that we have all these rules in place, but you really made a significant impact on my life. So those kinds of stories, those life-changing stories, absolutely give me all sorts of hope.
Thank you, Jen. How about we'll go to Fauzia and then we'll give Sara the last word.
So what's working for our organization, which is really promising, is that we are able to provide some service continuity. We're a very small organization, so it's very important for us by being able to keep our 3 core staff with the help of, a couple of multi-year grants. So that's really very, very helpful at this situation. Otherwise, many small organizations like us wouldn't probably survive this time. It's also nice to see our federal and provincial governments extending a hand in providing financial supports to individuals, businesses, and also to our social institutions. There's also recognition that we absolutely have to continue offering essential services. This is really, really hopeful. There's acknowledgement for additional risk for women and other vulnerable populations. Again, very hopeful. But most of all, the general spirit that I see, that we are in it together, I find it most helpful. It makes you feel you're not alone, and also in many cases give you a better perspective of the current situation.
Great, thank you, very important for sure. And Sara?
When I was speaking earlier, I touched on kind of what was giving me hope. So always I say the fact that we're doing social change work and doing public education and changing the attitudes at the heart of violence against women, whether it's sexual assault, domestic violence, human trafficking, like that is all about power and control, and there's ways to address it. And if anything, like the Me Too movement taught us that social change is possible. It was a profound moment. It was a watershed moment. And so social change is possible. The other thing is just the fact that we're here today and that we're embraced by our community like we've never been before, in terms of this is on folks' radar, our community cares. That gives us a lot of hope. And I think this is probably a poor way for me to end it, because I'll probably flub it up because I wasn't planning on doing this, but I was just thinking of the quote from Martin Luther King, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever impacts one impacts all indirectly. And I think that is a call for us to be community.
Wonderful. Well, what a great way to end. Very inspiring. All of you, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to our guests who have joined. Thank you to you who've joined us today to learn more about COVID-19 and gendered violence.